Jack, would you like to open the service in prayer, please? No hearing aids today. Yeah. Okay, yeah, you're on. Okay.
Precious Father in heaven, thank you very much, Father, for bringing us back and have some extra blessings on the speaking this morning and some protection for us this coming week. And I thank you for everything in Christ's name. Amen.
Amen. All right, we're going to open with a video called Being Seen.
Have you ever had the kind of friendship where you can almost read each other's minds? My closest friends and I call this Bestie ESP. Some people call it being seen. It's comforting to be known and seen for who you really are. The Bible tells us that God also sees us and knows us. He knows all our thoughts, and there's nothing we can hide from Him. Psalm 131 says, "I'm an open book to you. Even from a distance, you know what I'm thinking. You know when I leave and when I get back. I'm never out of your sight. You know everything I'm going to say before I start the first sentence. I look behind me, and you're there. Then up ahead, and you're there too. Your reassuring presence coming and going. This is too much, too wonderful. I can't take it all in." If you're like me, you're thinking, "Oh no, I don't want God to always know what I'm thinking. I don't want God to know when I lose my temper and yell. Won't He be mad or disappointed?" It's too late. He already knows. Here's a story that illustrates how that doesn't even matter. A mother had baked chocolate chip cookies and told her preschooler that he couldn't have a cookie until after dinner. She left the kitchen to work in the laundry room, and when she came back, there was a little step stool he used to reach anything on the kitchen counter. Sure enough, one of the cookies was gone. This mother went to her little boy, saw the crumbs sticking to his mouth, and asked him if he ate a cookie. He looked incredulous and said, "How did you know?" We are sometimes like that preschooler, forgetting that our Creator knows us inside and out. God knows our triumphs over selfishness, and He knows when we blow it. He sees our generosity, as well as the times we don't want to share. We can't hide anything from God, but that's good news. If our friends can see us and still love us, our Creator God can do that and so much more. Even when we mess up, God is always on our side, just like our friends with their Bestie ESP. We don't have to worry that our feelings disappoint Him. He knows transformation is messy business, and He's willing to get down in the mess with you and me. I'm Michelle Fleming, speaking of life.
The title for today is He Knows You. The full title from the Equiper is actually He Knows You, the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So we start with the story about the little fella and the chocolate chip cookies that couldn't figure out how his mom knew that he took them. Does anybody have a similar experience that either something you did or your kids did or somebody you know did that falls along the same line as this? And if you have something, make sure it's humorous. This isn't confession time when you got caught doing something something bad that you didn't want to do. Anybody have anything? Yeah. Well, I can't think of anything. I got caught doing stuff, but I have a funny example involved the neighbor kids that we grew up beside in West Virginia. And we had 6 kids. They had 6 kids. So like us, they had 5 girls and 1 boy. Well, one Easter, and I've told this story before, but it's funny. It's one of my favorites. during Easter, the mom and dad went out and bought the Easter candy for the Easter baskets, and if with 6 kids, it was a pretty good haul. Well, 2 of them found it. 2 of them found it. And it was the boy and one of the younger little girls. And they looked at the stash of chocolate eggs and jelly beans and, all this stuff. And the little boy looks at his sister and goes, "Do you think it's okay if we eat it?" And she goes, "Sure it is, honey. Tomorrow the Easter bunny comes and he's going to bring a whole bunch more." Now, did the parents figure out what happened? I think they did. Now, it was different in the story that she illustrated where there was only one child, so she knew who did it. That's what I say at home. It's just Jerry and me. If something happens, I know who did it. Well, the mom, with the story about the little boy and the cookies, there was only one, so she knew who did it. But there was 6 to choose from in their family, and they were probably all capable of doing it. And, sometimes us, the kids next door, we were partners in crime and things, so, it could have extended over to next door. But the mom and dad figured out who did it. They did. So, anyway, let me ask you a question. The mom with the story and the little boy that swiped the cookie when he was supposed to not eat the cookie until after he had dinner, did she love him any less because of that? No. Did the next door neighbors, did the parents love the 2 kids that got into the Easter candy? Did they love them any less because of that?
No.
No. And they had doubts because the little boy asked his sister, "Do you think we ought to get into this?" He had his doubts that maybe that wasn't the right thing to do. And of course, she assured him she had an answer for that. So did they get in trouble? Yes, they did. They did. But the parents did not love those children less because they made a mistake. And you see videos. There are so many videos on social media now of kids that get caught doing things. And it's not just kids. It extends to pets, that the mom or the dad come home and 2 dogs, 3 dogs, and they find the trash dumped in the kitchen and it's all over the floor and they've got the animals lined up. Have you seen those videos, those kinds of videos? And they're sitting there looking at their masters, their owners, and they're saying, "Which one of you got into the garbage can?" And they know they're in trouble. And the owner, they already have a pretty good idea who did it. And it's funny, like you'll see dogs, like children, that will hang their head like this and just kind of sink down because they got into the garbage can and they knew they weren't supposed to. And the dog is probably wondering, how did she know? Or you see the ones where one dog will rat out his friend. He'll look at the other one and he did it. So, a lot of ways they're like little kids. So, we are often like the little preschooler that she talked about, that took his little step stool and got the cookie. When we forget that our Creator knows us intimately. We know it, but then we kind of forget it. And we need to be reminded from time to time that we are the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're a mix of all that. He knows when we are at our most loving best, and we all are at times at our best. And he sees us when we are our most deceptive worst. Before services today, Elmo and Jack and I were talking about some of the characters in the Bible and some of the stuff they did, lies, trickery. We were talking about Abraham and Sarah. You might recall the story of Abraham going through, I forget which country it was, but he was married to Sarah, who was a very, very beautiful woman. And he knew that the king or the Pharaoh, whoever it was, when he sees her, he's going to want her to be his wife. So he kind of came up with a half-truth about this, that Sarah was his sister. That's what he was going to say. And that was kind of true. I believe she was his half-sister. There was some sort of relation there. So he lied to the king that was his sister, so they wouldn't kill him and take her to be his wife. And you know the rest of the story. Yeah, the king saw Sarah and thought she was beautiful. So he took her back to the castle, or wherever the king was at that time. And terrible things started happening to him, and he couldn't figure out why. And then one day, he saw Abraham and Sarah smooching in the garden. And he said, "That's not your sister." And he got in trouble for that. He basically maybe white lied, half-truth. But, this was Abraham, the promises that were given to this man. And then we've got, King David. He's the poster boy of bad behavior in the Bible. The things that he did, I think pretty much he broke every commandment there was. He lied, he cheated, he murdered. I'm not sure if he was ever bad to his parents. That's not revealed. But it's like you look at the stuff he did, and someone might say, well, he's condemned to hell. He's going to burn for his sins. But he's called what in the Old Testament? A man after God's own heart. And that's amazing that someone that could mess up and do so many things could be called a man after God's own heart. Psalms 139. Michelle quoted from that at the beginning. And she's quoted from the Message version, which I have here today. But when you read through Psalm 139, and it was written by who? Any guesses? David. Yes, David wrote Psalms 139. And you can tell when he wrote this that he knew this from experience. It's interesting to consider when reflecting about the omniscient nature of God. Look at a couple of the interesting ideas from the psalm. And I'm going to quote from the Message, and it starts out, "God, investigate my life. Get all the facts firsthand. I am an open book to you. Even from a distance, you know what I'm thinking." David says he even knows my thoughts. And you know when I leave, when I check out, when I do things I shouldn't do, and you know when I get back, when I repent. I am never out of your sight. You know everything I'm going to say before I start the first sentence. Before the words come out of my mouth, God already knew what was going to come out. You look behind me. I look behind me, and there you are. Then up ahead, and you're there too. Your reassuring presence coming and going. This is too much, too wonderful. This was wonderful, he said. I can't take it all in. He says, I am just blown away by how well you know me. And why is that? Why does God take the time? Why does he take the trouble to know us? Because he seeks a relationship with us. He knows us. He knows everything about us. And he wants us to know him too. The psalmist used both first-person nouns, I, my, and second-person pronouns, you and your. This shows the relationship that David had with God. And not just David. God flourishes when there is an open honesty. No hiding, no holding back, no pretending. It doesn't do any good to hide, does it? Ask Adam and Eve, did it help when they hid in the garden? No. God came looking for them. Do you think he knew where they were? Yes. Do you think he knew what they had done? Yes. He sure did. No hiding, no holding back, and it doesn't do any good. And the psalmist points this out. Before I even open my mouth, you know what I'm going to say. And it's kind of like the friendship that Michelle was talking about. People that are really, really close, like best friends, husbands and wives, parents and children. It's like you know each other so well. And it seems like the longer you're married, the worse this gets, where you're like completing each other's sentences and, the one starts, the other finishes, and yep, that's right. Now how do we know these things? because of years of relationship, of getting to know the other person. You may want to share, okay. We often act as if God is not aware of us, that he kind of forgets us. We kind of blend in at times. Many see Christians as people who act one way on Sunday and another way the rest of the week. Oh, surely not. People think that when we get to church on Sunday, we put on a church face and we act differently in church. Could that be? Could that be? And then you get your dose of immunity on the island because you showed up in church and you got the good points, and then when you walk out into the community, you pick up your old self again. And people see that. They see that, the behaviors. A lot of us that have been to church have seen that, have witnessed that. And our church is no different than anybody else, that you have your church face. And some people think of that as being hypocritical. Really? As if we are in God's presence only when we're worshiping at church. It's kind of like you open the magic door up front here, and it's like you walk in and ta-da! I am in God's presence now. This is his church. This is his building. This is his house. I am in his presence. But then when you get in your car in the parking lot and drive home, door shuts. Yeah. But does it stop there? Does it stop there? David says no, it doesn't stop there. If we're in God's presence only when we're worshiping in church. Theologian Walter, Brueggemann says that the Psalms are prayers addressed to a known, named, identifiable you. That when the Psalms were written, they were written from experience to a real being. God is not some undefined force, but the Father, Son, and Spirit that is seeking a relationship with humanity. Really? He wants a relationship with us. He's not some far-off, mean, distant God, that he really wants a relationship. He knows us. He wants us to know him. 20th century Jewish philosopher Martin Buber offers this reflection on our ever-present God who is always seeking us. Where I wander, you. Where I ponder, you. Only you, you again, always you, always in his thoughts. God knows every part of us, down to every detail. He probably knows us better than we know ourselves. And he wants us to know him. That's an amazing statement. He wants us to know him. How can that be? Us, made from the dust of the ground, mortals, billions of us. How can he want to have a relationship with every person that is, was, and is yet to come? How can that be? The verb know occurs 7 times in the passage that I just read in Psalms 139, and twice in verse 23. This Hebrew word, Y-A-D-A, yada, I hope that's correct, as found in other parts of the Bible, can mean anything from just a casual knowing to knowing somebody intimately. But God knows us. Psalms 139, verses 1, 2, 4, and 6 emphasize that, the verses that I just read. So knowing God's unchanging character is a key factor in establishing an intimate relationship. I'll read that again. His unchanging character. I change not. I am the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. A popular Christian worship song by Tommy Walker is, and you guys know this one, He Knows My Name. We used to sing that at the other church. And the lyrics agree with what Psalms 139 tells us. You know the words. He knows my name. He knows my every thought. He sees each tear that falls and hears me when I call. Do you remember that one that we used to sing? That was probably the favorite of the denomination of our congregation. That for a time I was a worship leader, and Rod was too, and you may have seen people that when that song played and people sang, they would cry. And it's a very simple song, but it's talking about the relationship that God knows what we're going through. He knows everything about us. And that is very comforting. It is humbling. It is emotional to a lot of people that no matter where I go, He knows my name. Isn't that amazing? He knows everybody's name. And it was amazing when God would send messengers down from heaven. And the angel, remember, he appeared to Mary. He knew her name. Now, I think that probably took her back. Not only was she talking to a big shiny being that says, "Don't be afraid, Mary," he knew her name. And how did he know her name? Because God knew her name. Every single person, he knows her name. Let's continue in verse 13 through 16 of Psalms 139. Is there any place I can go to avoid your spirit and to be out of your sight? Again, this is from the Message version. If I climb to the sky, you're there. You know, if I'm in a jet plane, you're there. If I go underground, you're there. If I'm in a subway in New York City, you're there with me. If I flew on morning's wings to the far western horizon, you'd find me in a minute. If I was on a rocket ship, if I was in the space station, it doesn't matter. You know, and this was written thousands of years ago, where David mused about, well, you know, if I was on the wings of a bird. They didn't have airplanes then. They didn't have the Skylab. They didn't have space stations. But you know, in this day and age, we are up in the air physically. And that doesn't matter. He knows us. You know me in a minute. And you're already there waiting. When I get there, you're there waiting for me. And then I said to myself, he even sees me in the dark. There's no place I can hide. And at night, I'm immersed in the light. It's a fact. Darkness isn't dark to you. You see me. Night and day, darkness and light, they're all the same. Have you ever played hide and seek when you were a little kid? Have you ever watched a little child play hide and seek and they think they're hidden and they're not? And the parent comes into the room and there's a curtain in the living room and they're hiding behind it. But the thing is, the curtain only comes down so far. And you see little feet. So they think they're hidden, but they're not. Well, that's how we are with God. We can think we're hidden. We can try to hide. Jonah tried to hide. Did that work out for him? He got on a boat and was headed as fast as he could in the opposite direction. This chosen prophet of God wanted none of that. And he tried to hide, didn't he? He said, well, you know, if I go the opposite direction, I'm going to get out of this. And God says, hold my halo and watch this. And you know the story. The storm came up. A giant fish swallowed him. He was in whatever that was for 3 days and 3 nights, and then the fish barfed on the shore, and there was Jonah in Nineveh where he didn't want to go. He didn't do very good at hiding, did he? He tried. Didn't work out. The passage that I just read shows us that our bodies are good. He says we are fearfully and wonderfully made. Really? Can you look at how the organs and all the components of the body all work together and not think that there is a master designer in all of that? I just can't fathom that all of this just happened. But the scripture says we are wonderfully made. We are amazingly made. And it's easy to think God made a mistake or he wasn't involved in the creation of someone born physically or mentally challenged. What happens if something doesn't go right? To believe this, we have to believe that God is not aware when we face a serious disease or physical challenge later in life. We'd have to second guess God and his plan for each one of us. We have to second guess his ability to work with us in every circumstance of life. So even when things don't turn out like we expect, isn't that what life is? Does everything turn out like we expect? No. But he says everything is physically and wonderfully made. We don't always know God's plan. And we were talking about that before services too, that we really have just gotten a glimpse. That smoky glass that I talk about. We don't really know what is ahead because nobody has actually been there and come back and told about it, like on Back to the Future, Doc and the DeLorean. You may have seen that movie. There was like 3 of them, I think. It was so popular. But Doc, the crazy scientist would get in the DeLorean and space travel. And it was a fun movie. But we don't really do that. If you think you do that, you might want to get some help. But, I'm not saying that to be funny. We all always know God's plan. We haven't space traveled to see what the life is beyond. We haven't seen what this place called heaven really is. There's just some basic descriptions. But I've said many times that if we got the full description of it, we still wouldn't understand. It's just something that we're all promised to experience. If we think God is only involved in some cases, or he prefers some people, we limit him and his ability to bring good and glory to, what is his message? Who is it intended for? What's that 3-letter word that keeps popping up all the time? It is extended to A-L-L. All. We don't always know why we were created the way we are. We don't understand our circumstance. We don't understand why things happen the way they do sometimes. But we can know that we were created by somebody and he knows why. He knows why. He said, take no anxious thought. Oh, that's not me. I have anxious thoughts. I'm, trying to figure stuff out. I overanalyze. Yes, that's right. I do. I have too many mind tabs open at one time. Although I'm getting better. Yes, I'm getting better. Where I only, I saw a very funny comedian that was talking about the differences between men and women. And he basically said, and this is a funny video, you need to watch it sometimes if you can find it on the internet, but he said men have boxes in their mind, tabs or whatever you want to call it, compartments, areas of their mind that they think in, and so do women. The difference is men are in one box at a time, thinking or analyzing about something, and women are in multiple boxes all at the same time. And that's me. It is overthinking, going to that. But he said, and this was very funny, he said the man's favorite box is the one that has nothing in it. So maybe that's why women make pretty good air traffic controllers. They can keep track of all the planes. They just have that ability. But it's really a funny video. We don't always know why we're created and why we are the way we are and why things happen. But regardless, we know he's always there. And as we are reminded in last week's sermon, he never leaves us nor forsakes us. We have privilege. Remember the last sermon talked about privilege? He never leaves us nor forsakes us, regardless of the physical or mental limitations that we may face, and no matter what we have done. And back to King David and the story of Bathsheba. Saw a pretty girl. She was married. Had his guys go get her. Now, David was privileged, wasn't he? He was the king, and he was kind of a rock star. He was good looking. He was a great soldier. He was kind of like Mick Jagger, although it says David was good looking, and Mick Jagger, he can strut across the stage at 70, whatever he is, but David had privilege, and he forgot who he was from time to time. And when he sent for Bathsheba, his guys go, "No, David." They try to talk, that is not good. She is a married lady. Well, he's the rock star king, and they go get her because he's the king, and what a king wants, a king wants. And the rest of the story. She became pregnant. Her husband, Uriah, he tried to trick him into, going home and visiting his wife. Nothing would work because Uriah was a loyal soldier. So what did David do? He moved him to the heat of battle where he knew he would die. And he was. He was killed in battle. Now that is just horrible, what he did. Horrible. And he ended up in a bad circumstance. It was not a happy marriage. The baby didn't make it. Now, yes, David was a man after God's own heart, but he sinned and there were penalties. And he thinks he's getting away with everything until one day there's a knock at the door and it's this prophet. Now, prophets weren't popular people, and you know why? Because they told people what they were doing wrong. Prophet knocks at the door, and he starts telling David a story about a rich man that had all kinds of sheep. And there was a poor man that had one little sheep. And it was a special little sheep. It was a pet to the family. And the kids carried it around. And they loved that sheep. And the rich man saw this sheep and he didn't want to, slaughter one of his own. So he goes over to the poor family and takes their sheep and eats it for dinner. And what did David do? He was enraged at the behavior of that man. And I think he says he should be put to death. And then the prophet says, "David, you're that man. You're that man." And he realizes right then and right there what he had done. God knew what he was doing. He thought that he could get, be the sneaky and get out of this situation. God knew everything that he had done and told it to the prophet. God thinks human bodies are so good, our physical bodies, he thinks they're so good that the Word, Jesus, became flesh and took on a human body as a baby. And you know what? Colossians 2:9 tells us what? He still has the human body. He is fully human and fully spirit. Wrap your mind around that. God has this on his mind. How often do we try to figure out what God is doing and we fail? God, why don't you allow this? Why don't you do that? Why don't you intervene? Why don't you heal? His thoughts and plans and dreams for us are far beyond what we can comprehend. And this is so comforting. But we can rest assured when it comes to the end of our lives, we find that He always has been with us. I've talked about him before. Worked with a fellow that was a primitive Baptist pastor here in town. He's not here anymore. He was transferred, and I think he's somewhere around Myrtle Beach. And there is a passage that I have quoted many, many times that tells us what is ahead for us. I've mentioned it in sermons. I've used it at funerals. And he reposted that on Facebook this week. It was 8 years ago I first saw his quote on that. His name is Michael Goins. He's still a primitive Baptist pastor. But he requoted his quote. He posted it again, and it says something like, we have such a limited idea, knowledge, what we know about heaven. And he says, we can be happy because we don't know everything that's going to be there. But he says, we know everything that's not there. There is no more tears. There is no more pain. There is no more strife. There are no more divisions. There is no more devil. And Michael says, and that is good enough for me. That God knows. God knows us. He knows what lies ahead. And we are always on His mind. We can rest assured that when it comes to the end of our lives, we will find He has always been with us. Amen.